The 2022 NHL Stanley Cup Playoff matchups are completely set. We have a schedule, and today we're going to preview all the series and give you my predictions on who I think will win in round one, and that's coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, today is the playoff preview and prediction day. Obviously, this is something that we've been working up to here for some time, something we always do every season as we approach the playoffs. I'll give you a preview on what I think you should expect for each series, and then of course I'll give you my thoughts and breakdown on who I think is going to win and why. Now, obviously, a lot of these teams have been battling it out over an 82-game season. We have lots of numbers to look at, lots of key metrics we can examine, but at the end of the day, sometimes a lot of regular season play in statistics don't always translate to playoffs, and it doesn't necessarily mean that, if one team outperformed the other, etc., that it's really going to lead to victory. It doesn't always work that way. It seems like there's pretty much always one or two upsets and things that we don't see happening come out and be, wrecking everybody's playoff brackets. That's just the way things go. That's just the nature of sports in whole. Now, before we get into any predictions, I just want to remind everybody again, because there's always a few comments. If I don't pick your team to win, it does not mean I hate your team. It doesn't mean I'm against them in any way. It just means that I've justified, my thoughts that the other team has the better chance to win. Will I be right? Not always. I'm probably going to do 50-50 here at best when it comes to getting everything right. This is really just an analysis and an opinion based on the stats that you can kind of learn what to expect here in each series. And you know what? If I get some right, I get some right. If I get some wrong, that part really is just for fun. But I'd like to know what your thoughts are down below in the comments. Let me know your thoughts on that, and we can have some fun here making some predictions together as a community. So let's start here with the Western Conference. Now, of course, we have the high-powered Colorado Avalanche doing battle with the Nashville Predators, essentially is your top team versus your bottom wildcard team. Now, the Nashville Predators actually handled the Avalanche pretty good this year with a record of 3-1. So in the case of the Avs, they had a record of 1-1-2, so two of those wins came in overtime for the Predators. Now, of course, overtime in the playoffs are not the same as the regular season. Obviously, you get 3-on-3 in a shootout, whereas in the playoffs, you get 5-on-5, assuming like regular play continuously, until there's a goal and a winning team decided. So obviously it's hard to look at some of these regular season numbers and really think it's okay, well, it's going to work out. This team just handles that team. But you know what? It's not almost the case. Like I said, it's a whole different animal in a different style of play. So it doesn't automatically mean anything. Now, the Avalanche were certainly a pretty high-powered team. They averaged 3.76 goals per game while giving up 2.83, where the Predators averaged 3.2 goals a game while giving up just over 3 at 3.05. So certainly, a much bigger differential on Colorado, much more positive that way. So they certainly outscored their opponents quite a bit, more offensive and certainly better defensive. So really, when you look at both ends of the ice there, the Avalanche do have an edge on both regards. Overall records for the Avalanche this year was 50, 21, and 11, whereas the Predators finished with a record of 45, 30, and 7. Of course, we're expecting a UC Saros versus Darcy Kuemper matchup. That's if UC Saros can even play. We don't even know, and that's probably not realistic to think he's going to be honest. We're likely looking at David Rittich being the starting goaltender for Nashville. I mean, the last we had heard is that Saros likely is going to be out for at least a few weeks, but it could be longer, because it's expected that even though the team hasn't really said much, that it's a high ankle sprain that he's dealing with, and they can drag on 4 to 6 weeks. So if Nashville doesn't get out of round one, it's quite possible that he might not even be able to play here in the playoffs. Obviously, that's going to be a big blow for them. I think they would have been in tough anyway, but that's just going to make it more so advantage Colorado. If you look at special teams, the Avalanche had a power play percentage here of over 24% on the regular season, while killing penalties at a rate of 79.7. So that's certainly pretty effective on both sides. The Predators, though, had an equally good power play, 24.4, and a PK of 79.2. So not a drastic difference in that regard. It's hard to really give a team an advantage that way when it comes to special teams. If you look at key players to look out for, you can look at the Avalanche, they've got key players at all aspects of the, all over the ice here. You've got Mikko Rantanen, you got Nathan McKinnon, you got Gabriel Landeskog, expected to be back for Game 1. Nazem Kadri having a career year. Cale Makar back there on defense having another awesome season. So, I mean, the Avalanche are just loaded with talent, where the Predators have obviously being led by guys like Matt Duchene, Philip Forsberg, Roman Josi. Josi having an exceptional season. But really, if you look at the star power in each team, the Avalanche certainly have the advantage. Special teams pretty much a wash. We're going to give a goaltending advantage to the Avalanche, especially with Saros being out. Otherwise, it would be a tough one to call. He might even be advantage Nashville. And of course, looking at the overall stats, personally, I expect the Avalanche to come out and win this series. I think Nashville might be able to steal a game, or, I'm going to say it's probably going to end 5, maybe 6 at most. But I'm going to say the Avalanche probably take it in 5 games without UC Saros. I just don't think the Preds are going to be able to pull one off. They might get one game at home, maybe, even though they outplayed them through the regular season and stole a couple of victories. Like I said, a couple of those games were in overtime. I don't think that's going to translate to these playoffs, given how the formats are different. So to me, I'm picking Colorado to win this series in relatively short order. Now we have the Minnesota Wild doing battle with the St. Louis Blues, and this is going to be an epic series. I think it's going to be a case where both teams absolutely beat the snot out of each other. They're both really highly competitive teams. They have a lot to look forward to. Been very exciting hockey on both sides of it, and it's going to be very interesting here, to say the least. It could be one of the tighter series for sure. Even if it doesn't go to 7 games, which would be a lot of fun for us fans to be able to watch, I still think that every game, I don't expect there to be any blowouts or anything like that. I expect every game to be tight checking, probably 1-goal games, etc. But the Blues did handle the Wild this year. They have a 3-0 record against them. But again, 2 of those wins were in overtime. Minnesota has a record of 0-1-2. So certainly, even though they dropped 3 games consecutively here to the Blues this year, 2 wins, 2 of those games were in overtime. It's a different format. I'm not sure that you can really put a lot of stock into that. But if you look at the breakdown of goals for and against for each team, Minnesota scored an average of 3.72 per game. St. Louis scored an average of 3.77 per game. So not a great deal of difference that way. Minnesota gave up an average of 3.04 a game, whereas St. Louis only had 2.91. So certainly fair to say that the Blues are probably a little bit better defensively here. And offensively speaking, they're fairly comparable. The Blues finished with a record 49, 22, and 11 compared to the Wild's 53, 22, and 7. So again, not a huge deal of difference, but certainly a little bit here to give Minnesota the edge and get them home ice advantage. If you look at the special teams now, the St. Louis Blues do have an advantage for sure on both sides of it. You get the power play at 27%. The Blues had the second best power play in the NHL this year, whereas Minnesota only had 20.5, which is still decent. That's still a good result, but a big difference from 27. And on the PK, the Blues were 84% compared to Minnesota's 76.1. So big time advantage in special teams. Goaltending, though, obviously Marc-Andre Fleury was acquired by Minnesota. Plus they have Cam Talbot. Fleury was only there for the last 15, 20 games, so obviously that's not a huge sample size. And of course the Blues are running with Binnington and Husso, and it's not quite clear who's still going to be the main goalie playing. We could even see multiple goalies playing, and as teams haven't really made a firm decision yet, and they have a tough decision on both cases. Binnington's got the experience, but Husso's been a better goalie, but Binnington was really good down the stretch, so I don't know who's getting the net there in game 1 for St. Louis. Same goes for Minnesota, where they could do more of a platoon. It's hard to say, but you know what? Either way, I think it's pretty close in that regard. Both teams have some pretty solid goaltending. It's really tough to give one team an advantage there versus the other. But given everything that's transpired here, I am picking St. Louis to win, but I think it's going to take at least 6 games, maybe 7. I think special teams will play a role. I think the Blues are just a little bit deeper overall. I do like how they've been playing. They're not quite the exact same kind of team that won the Stanley Cup a few years ago. But we see some of those same guys that are still there with a different group mixed in here. Makes them a little bit different style. So I'm picking St. Louis to win a very tight series against the Minnesota Wild. Now, jumping to the other division, we've got the Calgary Flames doing battle with the Dallas Stars. The Flames had a tremendous season. Didn't lose in regulation in Dallas this year. Have a 2-0-1 record. So Dallas with a record of 1-2. So the win by Dallas against the Flames this year was an overtime victory. Again, like I said before, because of the format change, it's hard to put a lot of stock into that. Dallas is just nowhere near as offensively gifted as Calgary. They have a 2.84 average goals per game and a 2.98 goals against. So they're still probably the only team, I think, in here in the playoffs that are actually giving up more than they're scoring. The Dallas Stars don't really have anything for secondary scoring right now. Outside of the Robertson line, they're just not getting much. Even the guys like Ben and Seguin are just not contributing at the level they used to be able to. Obviously that's a big problem. Whereas Calgary, on the other hand, is averaging over 3.5 goals a game and only giving up 2.5. So that's a 1 goal differential every game, which is tremendously huge. I mean, the Flames are being led by a lot of offensively gifted players, and at the same time have some solid defensemen and good goaltending. They had an overall record of 50, 21, and 11 compared to Dallas's 46, 30, and 6. You're going to see a goaltending battle of Jacob Markstrom against Jake Ottinger. Special teams, you're looking at the Flames with a power play of 22.9 compared to 22.4 in the Dallas Stars. So not a drastic difference that way. The PK, though, was pretty drastic. 85% for Calgary versus only 79% for Dallas. So that's pretty substantial. I think really, if you look at it, the Calgary Flames have a lot more high-end talent. They have the much deeper forward group. They have arguably the better goaltending. I mean, Markstrom is a tremendous goalie, even though Jake Ottinger is pretty good himself. It's going to be tough to beat Markstrom in a series. And I think between special teams, the depth, and just the offensive firepower, the Flames should get through the Dallas Stars with relative ease here and likely win in 4 or 5 games. Now, the other series in the West pits the Edmonton Oilers against the Los Angeles Kings. And the Kings have had a tough time with Edmonton this year. They have a record of 1-2-1. The Oilers, of course, have a 3-1 record. So clearly, one of those victories came in overtime, but still, head-to-head, they certainly had the slight advantage this year. The Oilers finished with a record of 49, 27, and 6, where the Kings had a record of 44, 27, and 11. You're likely going to see Jonathan Quick against Mike Smith between the pipes. On special teams, though, you certainly have a clear advantage for the Oilers. They have a 26% power play versus only 16.5 on LA's side. That's tremendous. That's a 10% gap that the Kings just can't make up for. That's a huge advantage for the Edmonton Oilers. Penalty kill is about 79.4 for the Edmonton Oilers, 76.7 for LA. So again, not drastically different, but again, advantage Edmonton in that regard. And if you look at the breakdown of offense and defense, the Oilers are averaging just shy of 3.5 goals a game, giving up 306, whereas the Kings have a 287 goals for, and only 2.83 goals against. So they're pretty close to being even for goals for and against, whereas the Oilers are scoring at a much higher rate. So to me, the Oilers are the much more offensively talented team. The Kings are going to be without Drew Doughty as well, which is a big blow. That's obviously not good. So I think the Oilers are going to be led by McDavid, Draisaitl, and company there, and they should be able to get through LA. But I think with the veterans that the Kings do have, and Jonathan Quick between the pipes, I wouldn't be surprised to see LA snag a victory or two, and I can see Edmonton winning maybe, and I'm going to say probably 6 games. But if I have any concerns about the Oilers, it is the goaltending. Now, I understand the goaltending the second half of the year, especially after the coaching change, was definitely better and hasn't been as much of a problem as it was early on. But to me, I'm just not 100% convinced that that's not going to creep back in here and become an issue. So we'll see where things go, but certainly I don't think it'd be an issue against LA, but it could become an issue for the Oilers to advance beyond round 1. So in the Western Conference, that will give us round 2 matchups of the Battle of Alberta, Calgary against Edmonton, and of course the Colorado Avalanche with the St. Louis Blues, and the other Western matchup would make for some really solid playoff series, in my opinion, and really would be fun and entertaining to watch for all of us. Now, let's jump over and take a look at the Eastern Conference. We got the first matchup would be the Florida Panthers and the Washington Capitals. The Panthers, the President's Trophy winners, the regular season's top team, averaged more than 4 goals per game. By far the most offensively gifted team in the NHL this year, averaging about 295 goals against per game. So that's a really impressive differential. Whereas the Capitals, on the other hand, scored 3.2 per game, allowing 2.95. So a decent differential for the Caps. But still, if you think about it, that's almost a whole goal per game more for Florida while having a similar defensive metric. So I just don't know that the Washington Capitals can slow down this offensive juggernaut here. The Panthers had a 2-1 record against the Caps this year, whereas the Caps were 1-1-1. So obviously one of those wins were in overtime. Regular season record for Florida, 52-18-6. So that's very impressive. Whereas the Capitals were 44-26-12. So lots and lots of overtime for Washington this year. You're going to see likely Sergei Bobrovsky and Ilya Samsonov for Washington. They may go with Vanecek, but I'm suspecting probably Samsonov is more than likely going to be your starter. Special teams, again, big advantage for Florida in the power play department. 24.4% power play versus only 18.8% for Washington, which is surprising given what the Caps can put out there for Ovechkin, Backstrom, O'Shea, and all those guys, John Carlson. They do have a great power play, but some of those guys are starting to get a little bit older, and they all dealt with their fair share of injuries this year too, so that could certainly play a role. Penalty killing was pretty close. Florida 79.5 versus 80.4 for Washington. So I'm going to say penalty killing is pretty much a wash. Advantage power play to Florida. Overall, all aspects of offense advantage Florida. Goaltending advantage Florida. And I just think they're too much to slow down. You've got Barkov, Huberdeau, Giroux, Reinhart, Bennett, Verhaeghe, all having awesome seasons. They're expected to get Ekblad back here in the first round. Maybe not game one, but soon. Whereas, you've got Ovechkin, Backstrom, O'Shea, etc. in Washington. I just don't know that they got enough juice in the tank of Washington to really give this team a run. I would not be surprised to see Florida wrap this up early. I'm going to say maybe 5 games. It could go longer, but I think Florida will get this one done at relative ease in early time. Now, the other matchup we're going to talk about next is the Toronto Maple Leafs against the Tampa Bay Lightning. I know this is a big matchup that a lot of people are interested in. Will the Maple Leafs make it out of the first round this year after multiple first-round failures with this current group of players that have been kind of growing up together and getting better? And they had a record regular season. They had a tremendous growth this year. Lots to be proud of. But to be running into the back-to-back Stanley Cup champions in the first round of the playoffs has got to be a concern for them this year. I know there was one real bad game earlier, back a little while. I can't remember, it wasn't too long ago, back in the last couple months here. The Lightning had a 2-1-1 record against the Leafs, where the records on the Leafs side were 2-2. So certainly, obviously one of the Leaf victories were in overtime. The Maple Leafs, again, very much an offensive juggernaut, scoring 3.8 goals per game, one of the more offensively gifted teams in the league, while allowing 307 on average going against them. Whereas the Lightning, on the other hand, scoring just shy of 3.5 goals per game, while allowing 2.78. So you could argue here that the Leafs were a little bit more offensive than the Lightning this year, but they certainly gave up more as well. The Lightning finished with a record of 51-23-8 compared to the record of the Leafs of 54-21-7. You're going to have arguably the best goalie in the world, Andrei Vasilevskiy, against Jack Campbell. That's a tough matchup. I like Campbell. He's good. This is so hard to go against back-to-back champions, and Vasilevskiy here just seems to be at his best when it matters most. You're looking at penalty killing. The Leafs do have a slight advantage, 82-1 compared to 80.6. In the power play, they have an advantage too, 27.3 versus 23.9. You're basically going to have your young offensive talented players like Matthews and Marner, Nylander, Tavares against guys like Stamkos, Kucherov, Point, Hedman. It's going to be a very, very tough matchup. I mean, to me, it's going to boil down to possibly Vasilevskiy versus Campbell and who's going to win that. And, as much as I like Campbell, I'm going to take Vasilevskiy a bulk of the time. I can see this one series maybe even going 7 games. And as much as it would be nice to see the Leafs win and get out of the first round, I have a hard time betting against the Lightning in this regard. But this is the one series that I honestly think is a bit of a toss-up. I can see it going in either direction. I don't see one team overly dominating the other. I think we're going to see a bit of a back-and-forth series. It might be a series of home and home, hard to say. Leafs do have that advantage, so maybe I'll be wrong here, but I'm going to pick the back-to-back champion Lightning to win round 1, and of course that'll set up an all-Florida matchup in round 2 of the Panthers against the Lightning, and we saw that last time, and that could be a really fun series here to see again. Now, in the other bracket, we're going to see the Carolina Hurricanes battling the Boston Bruins. The Hurricanes have absolutely dominated the Bruins this year, with a 3-0 record, and they outscored them 16-1, which is certainly not good for Boston. Bruins still have a really good team, but some of their top guys are getting a little bit older, and you have to wonder, how much gas they have in the tank, and can they keep this thing going and have another deep run? The Hurricanes ended up with a record of 54-20-8 compared to 51-26-5 for Boston. Power play penalty kill stats are certainly an advantage to Carolina, and especially on the PK. They had an 88% PK, best in the league against 81-3 for the Bruins, whereas 22% on the power play for Carolina compared to Boston's 21.2, so slight advantage there. So given the fact that they have the special teams advantage and how they dominated them all season, I am picking Carolina to win, but certainly my concern for the Carolina Hurricanes is between the pipes. Will Freddie Anderson and Antti Raanta be able to stay healthy and get the job done? We know Raanta is expected to be able to be available, but we don't know about Freddie Anderson as of yet. We haven't heard much, whereas the Bruins do have Ullmark and Swayman should be available. So if Boston is going to stand a chance to prove me wrong here and steal this series, it's going to have to be on the backs of their goaltending. Ullmark, I would imagine, will likely get the first start, and if he can steal a few games here, then just maybe the Bruins will be able to pull this off. But based on how the regular season went, and as I said before, I know it's not always an indicator, it's just so slanted, in my opinion, that I have to pick the Hurricanes in this series, and it's probably going to go, I can see it going to probably about 6 games. Now, the other series and the last one to look at here today is the Rangers and the Penguins. The Rangers have dominated the Penguins and seem to be their arch nemesis here for the last number of years. The Rangers have won 3 out of 4 this season with a 3-1 record. They had an overall record for New York of 52-24-6 compared to 46-25-11 for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Looking at the power play, the Rangers are certainly dominated in that regard too, 25.2% compared to 20.2%. On the PK side of things, the Penguins do have an advantage that way, 84.4 compared to 82.3. So certainly, a case where, in my opinion, the Rangers are the more offensively gifted team here. We don't know if Tristan Jarry can go. Igor Shesterkin's been one of the best goalies of the year all season long. So combining the fact here of the Rangers dominating the Penguins, they have an edge in goal. They have an edge in the power play, which I think is going to be pretty huge here. The more offensively gifted team, I am picking the Rangers to win this series here as well. That would set up a Carolina versus New York second round matchup. So just a quick recap here. Here's what your second round matchups would be if my predictions come true. You're going to have Florida versus Tampa, Carolina versus the Rangers in the East. In the Western Conference, you're going to have the Avalanche against the Blues and the Oilers against the Flames. So those are my predictions for round 1 of the Stanley Cup Playoffs. As I mentioned before, I want to know what you think down below. Give me some predictions. Let me know what you think. Who's going to win this series? The first round is always the best round in the Stanley Cup Playoffs, where teams are obviously healthier, have more energy, and usually you see the most competitive games when the first get underway here for round 1. So let's get excited for the start of the playoffs, which start on Monday, May the 2nd, and lots of action here for all of us hockey fans looking for great entertainment. So let me know your thoughts again down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.